Farmers today are facing rising costs, volatile markets, and extreme weather. The A Better Way to Farm podcast digs into strategies to help you take control of farm inputs and maximize profit so your farm can thrive for generations. Remember to take advantage of our free resources at abetterwaytofarm.com. Now, from America's Heartland, here's your host.
Hello, Rod here at A Better Way to Farm, where we increase yields and improve profits. Guys, thank you for tuning in today, and you're in for a real treat. We have a friend on the line with us who's been a friend for a really long time, and I appreciate him very much. And guys, we're going to focus on wheat today. We're going to talk about a lot of different things, but our focus is going to be wheat. A lot of you guys listening to our podcast, following us on social media, have said, hey, get us some info on wheat. And so I always do the same thing. I go to the best person I know to bring the information. That's what I've done here. This individual has been a friend for probably 20 plus years. I've watched his operation. I've watched his family grow up. It's been a lot of fun to spend time together. And I want to welcome to the call my good friend Chris from Oklahoma. Chris, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Rod. Appreciate it. Glad to be here.
Now, it's an exciting day to get to do this. I think the listeners are going to be in for a treat. So, Chris, tell us about your farming operation.
So we live in east central Oklahoma, near Okmulgee, and we farm wheat, corn, and soybeans, and we run a cow-calf operation. It's a family farm and ranch, and our son, he and his family take care of the livestock, and my wife and I, with some help from a very good friend that works with us, take care of the farming side.
That's fantastic. I know you've done a great job with all of that, and always enjoy getting to be down there at your farm. So who all do you farm with? Are there others involved, or is it, I know your son, I know you've got another guy there. Is there some others that help you, or?
Well, Daniel takes care of the planting and the spraying. And I tell people my job nowadays is just to keep him hamburgers and water and fertilizer to him. So, we kindly evolve as we get just a little bit older in life. So he does a great job, and it just works well that way.
Okay, so you're the gopher. Is that what you're telling me?
I'm the gopher, absolutely. Yes, I go for this and go for that, whatever they need.
That works. Chris, talk to us. Do you remember when we first met?
So we met at Commodity Classics, and we probably visited 2 or 3 years in there before we really started with you. And I think we started in earnest about 2009 or 10, but I met you, like I say, a few years before that.
Absolutely. Man, it seems like it was yesterday, but I knew it'd been quite a while. That's 15 growing seasons with us. So, Chris, working with us, what was the first thing that you used from us there in your operation? How'd you start with us?
Well, we began with Amplify. I think that's what we looked at when we would see you at the Commodity Classic. We would see the difference in corn seed emerging with Amplify compared to without. And of course, that's a game changer. If you grow corn, you want it out of the ground just as fast as you can. And so we began with Amplify, and we used Wex, and we began shortly thereafter using some starter fertilizer.
That's fantastic. What's your favorite product out of everything that you're using? And it's a lot of different things, but what's your favorite that you're using?
Well, there's a handful I wouldn't want you to take away from me. Amplify would have to be one of them on corn. Wex would definitely have to be one. Those two would be at the top of my list. I'll put it that way. But there's plenty more that I wouldn't want to give up.
I understand. You and I joke. I'm from Iowa. You're from Oklahoma. And I always joke about the fact that when I'm there in the summer, it feels like you're farming 6 miles from the sun. And so tell me what that Wex product does. What are you seeing with that? Why are you using it?
We feel like our soil texture has changed as far as water infiltration, root development. If you get a hard rain behind the planter, ground doesn't seem to crust as bad. And I mean, it's like every year it gets just a step better with time.
I think that's one of the things that I like so much about what we do is the fact that I tell everyone it's cumulative, that it piles on top of itself. Would you agree with that, Chris?
Absolutely would. I mean, when we began, we didn't just jump in on every acre. We tested some products, we tried some things, and the acres that we began with today are our best acres and our best farms.
Yeah. And the others are coming. It's just
they're coming. Absolutely.
Time. And that's really, really cool. One of the things that we've pushed, and Chris, you've had field days down there. We're going to talk about those in a little bit, but I've noticed, you're using the systems approach. Talk to us about what that is and why that's important to you.
Well, we're blessed to live and farm in an area that we can grow 3 crops in 2 years. And I realize as you move to the north farther that becomes more of a difficulty, but we'll plant wheat in October. Don't really like to plant until at least the middle of October, let it cool off a little bit, and then take care of the wheat crop. And if all goes well, the Lord will bless us with some summer rains, we'll go right back in and no-till double crop soybeans in there. End of June, we don't even care if it's up to the 4th of July, and try to make a bean crop then behind that. And they're making over in the fall of the year. I mean, obviously, you mentioned the heat, sunlight that we deal with, and that can be brutal in July and August. So we try to make a corn crop in front of that and a bean crop behind that. So then what's in wheat and double crop soybeans this year will end up rotated to corn the following year. And we've just seen our yields go up and our ground get better.
That's fantastic. Talk to us about how soil testing has played into your increased yields.
Well, you can go back. I mean, we've got soil tests all the way back to the date that we began with you guys. And so if we want to go back to 2010 and pull up a soil test on a farm that we started with, we can do that and see where it was then, where is it at today, and what's the trend line been like for the last 15 years. So that's all on my phone in the field with me. If you need to look on spur of the moment, it's there.
And that's a real plus when you're trying to figure that out. And it's also a plus, not in the spur of the moment, but over the long haul. Talk to us about what your soil test levels have done. What's the trend line on them over the last 15 years, Chris?
They're going up. P&K, we farm it's a Taloka sandy loam soil. 98% of our farm is prairie land. It's productive, but you have to have water or dependent upon rainfall. We don't have irrigation, so we're depending upon the good Lord to provide that. But you also have to put some nutrients to it. And if you do that, it will reward you. And so we have seen our P&K levels improving and coming up.
That's fantastic. Are you still doing testing with the products you get from us? I'm going to talk about your other test plots here in a little bit, but are you doing any testing right now with, like, say, the seed emergence aid or the starter fertilizer, or have you're done testing and you're using it?
We're done testing.
Okay. Let's talk about your wheat plot, because we are going to talk predominantly about wheat here as we launch off into this. I know you do wheat plots every year. Tell us about those and tell us why you do them.
So we're in the seed wheat business also, and Westbred plants a breeder plot on us every year, about 5 or 6 acres, and a lot of that material, you would know how that works. You'll never see it, but there will be a variety or 2 or 3 that will come out of that. And we ran into one last year that we grew as an experimental for them to produce some additional seed. They didn't know for sure at that time what they were going to do with it, or whether they were just going to throw it, cast it aside and move on. And lo and behold, it was about 15 bushel better, which is huge on wheat compared to what our variety that was standard that we were growing in. And so obviously this year we ramped the acres of that variety up. They went ahead and released it, and it looks very good again today. So, I mean, there's just too many bushels there on the table between different varieties that you got to know which one brings what to the table. If one's weak on stripe rust, then you better treat it early with a fungicide to ward that off. And if another one's more healthy, maybe you can get away without the early fungicide. But we run most everything. We apply two trips with a fungicide through the growing season.
That's pretty cool. I know you're growing some fantastic wheat, and I've been down there to see it. Chris, let's dive in and talk about some of the things that you do. First of all, General, give us an overview of your growing season for wheat. You do what before you plant? You do what when you plant? Let's talk through that.
We're coming out of a corn crop. And corn harvest here is a little earlier than it would be north, obviously. Last half of August, first part of September we're usually in full swing on corn harvest. So with us not wanting to plant wheat till 15th, 20th of October, we have a period of time in there. If we need to apply lime, fall of the year, it's usually dry enough. You can get across your ground. You can get some things done without fighting the wind. The wind can be an issue, spreading lime or whatever in the spring. So we like to use that 30 or 40-day window in there to apply lime. We also run some poultry litter where we're trying to grow 3 crops in 2 years. It takes an abundance of nutrients. So we're putting those down. We're working our stalks in. And sometimes we'll get away with 1 trip across the ground with a VT, vertical tillage tool, incorporating that and able to plant. And sometimes it will run 2 trips depending on the amount of residue. And then when we plant, we're set up on our drill to run 31818 since we're lower on P and K and trying to build those. That's our product of choice. And we will apply as we're planting then, and always run a pint of Centos. We love the sugar product. It's some of that low-hanging fruit we talk about. Doesn't break the farm, and we just love that product. So that goes in with the fertilizer right down in the trench at planting time.
Excellent. Yeah, that's an easy mix, and that's something that's overlooked, I think, and guys can be doing that. It's minimal investment. Let's talk about in the fall. You've got it up, you've got it going. Are you applying any nitrogen in the fall?
We are not. We're running poultry litter. Now, I might say if we weren't running litter, we would probably run about 20 units of nitrogen. We don't want an excessive amount in the fall because that just, where we live, it can get ahead of you. It can get too big too quick, especially if you have a late fall and a mild winter. So we never want more than about 20 units if we're applying it. But with the poultry litter, obviously you're getting some there, but sometimes it doesn't really release for you a lot until spring of the year. So when it warms up, that gets us through till the first shot of nitrogen then would be anywhere from the end of January to the middle of February would be our time frame if the weather will let us. We'll run nitrogen and sulfur at that time with a pint of boron. And then we'll come back about Feeks 5 growth stage, stem elongation, beginning to form the head above the ground, and we'll run the second shot of nitrogen, again with sulfur and boron. That's kind of the base of our program there on fertility.
Absolutely. You know, I got a good friend up in Michigan, Mike, and he had sent me a question. He said, I want to talk about nitrogen timing. I want to trade out January because in Michigan, you may not know this, but it's pretty ugly up there sometimes.
Yes.
So
absolutely.
Is that when you're just breaking dormancy? Is that what you're at, or your goal to be right before breaking dormancy with that first shot of nitrogen?
Our goal would be just about the time you're breaking dormancy, just so you know it's kind of like corn. You don't want it to have a bad day. So you want to promote tillering, and that your tillering will a lot of that will take place off of your first nitrogen application. And then that second shot of nitrogen obviously is going to form the head and the size of the head and the spikelets and how many rows you're going to have in there. So, but we don't want it starving for nitrogen on the front end.
Absolutely. Chris, talk about rates with us. How much you putting on there at, as you break dormancy? What are you doing at Feeks 5?
We're running about 50 units. If we have quite a bit of growth from the winter, we'll back that first shot of N up to 40 units, and we'll run about 4 units of sulfur. We want a 10-to-1 ratio between our nitrogen and our sulfur, and we just always do that, and it works. Then a pint of boron to begin to get boron in the plant, and then depending on how much we ran that first time, if we ran 50 units, which we did this year, then we'll come back with 50 more units. If we run 40 units early at breaking dormancy, we'll come back with 60 units. We have found if we get much over 100 units with the litter we have down, we can have some lodging issues.
And that's no fun. Are you using a pint of boron both times?
We are. In the past, we would run a quart at one time on the second shot, but we really prefer a pint each time and just kind of spoon feed it.
Excellent. Okay. And I think that's really important. It's funny. Everybody wants to get the high yields, but they're looking for that one silver bullet. And what I'm hearing on your wheat production is no different than your corn production or anyone else's. It's about doing the right things and just doing all of them. That would seem to be a common theme, Chris.
Definitely a systems approach. And we run stream bars to stream our nitrogen on. Years and years ago, we would spray it on, run herbicide with it, and I'm going way back now. You and I we didn't have gray hair at that time, so we're going way back. But we found out pretty quickly that didn't work very well. So you burned your wheat, you set it back, and you caused it to have several bad days. So when we went to streaming our nitrogen on, that totally eliminated that.
That's fantastic. And hey, by the way, at our age, I'm just glad we have hair. I don't care what color it is, buddy.
I don't have as much as I used to.
It's funny how that works. So we took care of the nitrogen. Let's talk about when are you applying the fungicide?
So we had a stripe rust outbreak. We were in the field last week, and if it was a susceptible variety, it was already starting to show up. So we immediately pulled the trigger and ran a fungicide to shut it down. Now, we were back in the field looking again today in that breeder plot, as well as several other fields that we've checked. I spent all afternoon on the gator, just going from one to the next and checking things. And we shut it down. We shut the stripe rust down with that first shot of fungicide. And now we're waiting to go back at heading time and run something, a product to try to take care of head scab and leaf diseases for the rest of the growing season.
That's cool. Are you co-applying anything else with that fungicide when you go or not?
We're running Feast XL with the second shot at heading time.
That's a good program. We've got multiple people that really like that. What are you seeing when you're putting in that 26% trizone nitrogen?
We're seeing zero burn from it, and it just seems like your wheat just does better. Is what we've noticed. You just pick up some additional bushels from it, and protein. At times on hard red wheat, we will get into a nice premium based on a higher protein wheat, and it really helps with that.
That's fantastic, and I know that's important to the guys that are growing it. When you're putting on your nitrogen, it's nitrogen, boron, and sulfur. Is there anything else being co-applied then?
Not on that trip, no.
Okay, very good. On your first fungicide pass, is there anything co-applied with that?
We ran an insecticide this time.
Okay.
We'll have some aphids in the spring of the year, and so we try to keep them knocked out. The only good bug's a dead bug, the way I see it. Well, I guess there's a few ladybugs that are good bugs, but if it's an aphid, he's not considered a good one.
One of the guys asked, and I think this is a good one, are you doing anything with plant growth regulators?
We are on corn. We are not on wheat because of the lodging issue. At times, we'll have to run something to kind of shorten them up and stiffen the straw a little bit, some Palisade or a product like that. So we don't want one foot on the gas and one on the brake. And I'm afraid that's what we would get if we run a growth regulator to push them. I'm afraid we would extend the height of the plant and cause some problems. So for that reason, we've stayed away from it.
And I respect that, Chris. I mean, you and I have had this conversation, and one of the things I think we fight in ag is that we want to get caught up in the new sexy thing. And PGRs is a big thing right now. We want to talk about plant growth regulators. The fact that it's new, the fact that it's exciting doesn't make it right. And I've seen some guys create some very short wheat at harvest time. They had really tall wheat a month before that. But that's what I think the PGRs are best at from what we've seen, other than that product you use to actually shorten it. That's the PGR that you're using, right?
Yes. And we don't do that every year. If we have a taller variety and it looks like it's really expressing itself that year, that's when we'll run it. But the vast majority of our acres, we do not run a Palisade product on.
Excellent. Okay. Chris, talk to me about tissue testing. Are you doing any tissue testing? What are you seeing with it? What are you using it for?
We are doing tissue testing on our wheat also, as well as corn and beans. We're using it to try to develop a ground floor of when does this crop need a given nutrient? And if it's the same time basically every year, then we want to be able to come in front of that time and try to get it out there a little bit ahead of time before it starts into a deficiency stage. And we're not as far along in that process as I would like to be, but we feel like we're learning every year and gaining ground. And we implemented that originally on corn, and we've kind of figured out there's a certain time in that plant's life that it's going to need this, this, and this on our farm. And based off a tissue test from previous years, if we can come in and be just a little bit in front of that, we feel like it gives us a leg up.
And I think, Chris, that people talk about, they think they're going to do tissue testing and do foliar feeding. They're going to make like $700 an acre, and you can make some money, not that much, but you can make some money. But I think the important thing is the education. Like you said, it's building that database so you know going forward what to do.
Absolutely. You don't figure it all out in 1 year or 2 years, or, I've been at this all my life and I still don't have it figured out, but I'm still trying to learn. And every once in a while you'll stumble into something and it just works. And you think, that's something I want to incorporate on every acre. And that's what we're looking at, not just the acres that we're, quote, trying to learn on, but if it really works, we want to incorporate it on all the acres.
Absolutely, because it's all about, at the end of the day, it's how many dollars per acre can we net. That's the relative number. I get that. I know, Chris, we talked earlier, you're using the starter. You're currently not putting any micros on when you plant, correct?
That is correct. Not now, we are on corn and soybeans, but not on wheat.
Absolutely. So let's talk about, you were saying, though, that you feel like you have learned through tissue testing here. You have not foliar fed in the fall. Is that true?
That is true, yes.
And do you see yourself in the fall of 24 changing that program?
I do. We're seeing some deficiencies that once you get into that growing season, I think we've gotten ourselves behind. And I think we need to be coming in front a little bit and doing a little bit more front loading. So a couple of products for sure, or nutrients that we're coming up short on. Boron's one of them, and manganese is another. Now, I know the boron, in its case, most of it's used a little bit later in the plant's life. That's why we're co-applying it with nitrogen in the spring. But I think, based on what I've seen, and we're low on manganese in soil test, and it's carrying over to being low in our tissue test. And I think in the future, that's one micro that we're going to play with in the fall of the year.
I think that'll probably be a good plan and make you some money. It's, for the guys out here that are always learning, always looking, there's a lot to learn, not being content with the same old way. And I know you're not. You guys such a great job with that. As you start looking at that foliar feed, what will you be putting with it? Will you put a little bit more of the 318-18, or what's your thought process there?
What I'm thinking is we'll probably run some manganese in the trench with the 318-18 at planting time, and then possibly come back with a foliar shot of 318-18 with some manganese in it early on in that plant's life before it goes dormant in the wintertime. So we would be off, sometime in there where we live, last half of November. We get the plant up, get it established, get 2 to 3 leaves on it, and then move with a shot of 318-18 and some manganese, and maybe another micro or two, but for sure manganese, because we struggle so much with it.
Yeah, and the bottom line is that plant will break dormancy with a lot more aggression. I think when you do that, that's going to be a good thing. So I'm excited for that. One question, a little bit funny off script. One guy said, "How do you afford to plant poverty grass, Chris?" What do you think of that?
Well, it wasn't poverty grass a couple of years ago, but it's working its way back down there now. But so we shoot for 80 to 100 bushel yields on our wheat. And then, as I mentioned a little bit ago, if the Lord will provide us some summer rains, we can make 40 to 60 bushel double crop beans behind that. So that's how we make it work. And then you're putting a lot of residue back in your ground because we don't bale any wheat straw off. Every bit of it that goes through the back of the combine is going right back in the ground. And same way with bean stubble. And you can get quite a load of material going back in the soil through two crops if you're fortunate enough to make two good crops.
Absolutely. Talk to me a little bit about that because we get guys. It's one of the arguments. I try to avoid the ag forums because of the arguments, but I see guys. Oh, you got to sell this because it's this much money, and you ought to do that. You're adamant, Chris. You and I have talked before. I know you're adamant. You don't sell stocks. You don't sell straw. Why is that?
Well, I've told you before that when my son was growing up, we would bale some straw for him. It was a project to help him learn, how cash flow worked and provide him with a little cash flow while he was growing up. It was his project. He managed it. All that Dad had to do was have a windrow of straw laying behind the combine. And what Dad didn't like about it was when we cut the beans in the fall of the year, and they were about 15 bushel less than the beans where the residue was spread uniformly over the field. So we don't do that anymore.
He graduated, moved on up.
He'd tell you he was too old to haul it anymore, and we don't want to do it anyway.
And you were glad. There you go.
I was glad, yes.
All right, that works. So yeah, that residue, that organic. Chris, in the time frame that we've known each other here, this 15 years, what your organic matter has done on your farms?
Yes, they're coming up. Now, we're on very light CEC soils. The majority of our soil is from a 6 to a 9 or 10 CEC. If we've got a 12 or 13, that's pretty heavy for us. So, consequently, our organic matters are going to be a little lower, but there's some of them now that are working their way up towards 2.5%. And I know, granted, that's low compared to some areas, but when you're looking at a 6 or a 7 or an 8 CEC, we can see better crops coming off of it and more moisture holding capacity. So we're gaining some ground somewhere.
Absolutely. Chris, it's not a secret. Every 1 point, just moving your organic matter from 1.5 to 2.5, that increases your holding capacity by 3/4 of an inch of water. And so you get to hang on to more water than someone that doesn't have that extra point. And I don't think there's any way to know how important that is, especially where it gets so hot and dry where you are.
It's critical where we are. I mean, we will get plenty of rain throughout the year, but you just might not get any rain in July and August. And that's the problem, right? When you really need it and it cuts off on you, then you're in a struggle then. So you better have stored up everything you can.
I live in a similar area in that my soils are light. And I tell everybody, Chris, I'm 10 days from a drought, and it can be rain when I tell you that. And I know you're the same way. And I got a friend named Justin out in Kansas, and he was talking last year that their crops did better than they did the year before. And so he went to the local guy that tracks the weather, and he said, man, we must have had a lot more rain than we had last year. And the guy that tracks weather said, actually, we're down about 10%. It doesn't have as much to do with volume as it does timing.
Absolutely. Yes. Timing is critical.
Yeah. We got 4 inches here a while back in 24 hours, and that's going to make our annual look pretty good. All it did was fill a lot of ditches.
Yes. that happens here way too often.
Exactly. Chris, talk to us. Compare your yields on your corn, your beans, and your wheat from when you met us to after working with A Better Way to Farm here. What have you seen happen? What's going on with your yields?
Our top end corn yields are about 75 bushel better than where they were.
Wow, that's fantastic. That's good. And I want to give a big shout out, Chris. You do very well in the state competition for corn yields down there, and I'm proud to get to be a little bitty part of that. But it's always fun to see how you guys do and the job that you're doing, and I find it to be fantastic. So congratulations on that. Let's talk about one of my favorite things that you ever did was a goof plot. Do you know what I'm talking about?
I've probably done more than one of them.
I'm referring to the one that was down there on that corner. I tell everybody, I share this story, and I say, do you ever make a big mistake and do it on the backside of the farm? Everybody's like, nope, never happens. And I said, well,
no.
Chris, he had one at an intersection of 2 paved roads. Talk to us about how that happened, and then talk to us about the results that you got.
So we were applying starter fertilizer on wheat as we were planting. I was in the drill, and for some reason, I don't know if the phone rang or whatever, but I failed to turn it on, and we're running a 30-foot drill, and I didn't see anything, honestly, for a while. And we planted, it was over in November, so it was getting late when we were planting, and it was small through the winter. And then I was going by there sometime in February on the spray rig, and I saw that 30-foot strip that was just, it was behind. And I mean, it was getting worse every day. And I thought, what in the world? Well, as soon as I looked at it, I knew exactly what had happened. I had failed to turn the fertilizer on. So I thought, my dad used to say, son, I want to know how I'm spending my money. So we got to figure out how we were spending it. It cost us about 18 bushel of wheat and 6 bushel of double crop beans behind it. So that's why we don't run too many tests on that anymore.
And I think that the 18 bushel wheat paid for the starter probably 4 or 5 times. And people, when I tell them that, they question, well, how could it impact the soybeans? And it's like, it's real simple. When you don't bale your residue, you left on each side of that 30-foot strip, that residue had a lot more nutrients left to recycle, and it changed how them soybeans grew. And you probably just had simply less residue where the 30-foot was, where you forgot.
Absolutely less residue and consequently less ground cover to hold the moisture, and all those things together, they really add up.
Yeah, I think everybody among us listening would say, yeah, I'd take another 6 bushel of soybeans, across my farm average. That would be fantastic. So, Chris, I've kept you quite a while, and I appreciate your time. You guys are planting corn right now, right?
We are planting corn. We're about 2/3 finished, and we've battled some wet spells coming through. Just about the time you get started, well, it'll rain again. But I also talked to a very good friend out in northwest Oklahoma this morning, and he said, "Well, we're getting dry up here in some areas." So, and they were calling for rain for about the whole state of Oklahoma, and he said they've pulled our chance out. So I just can't make myself fuss too much about being a little bit wet right now.
And you really don't want to call him and complain, right?
No, I don't want to call him and complain. No.
I understand. Chris, I appreciate your time. One last question here. Obviously, you must like something about us. You've been with us for a long time. What do you like about working with the team here at A Better Way to Farm?
If I have a question, and you never learn everything, there'll be something come up and I'll think, I wonder what Rod's idea is on this. And I'll pick the phone up and I'll call you. And just bouncing ideas off of one another is probably one of the things I like best.
I love that. It's been a lot of fun, and I always look forward to our conversations. Well, Chris, thank you. Any closing thoughts here you want to share with somebody that's going, hey, maybe I'd like to take a look at this? What would you say to a guy thinking he might want to try and do something better with his wheat and utilize our system here at A Better Way to Farm? What would you tell him?
Well, I think you start somewhere. You start with some acres that you want to learn on, and then you just begin to incorporate that into your entire farm, because the system just works. I mean, we've seen it with our yields. We've seen it with our farms. They have gotten better. And I just would like to be able to leave a farm better than what we found it.
I can appreciate that. And that's a good goal. Chris, thank you for your time here. And to all of you who listen, guys, thanks for tuning in. I hope you found as much value in this as I did. I always love talking to Chris because I always learn something. And we just appreciate it, guys. Thanks for your time. We appreciate you. If you need anything, you can reach out to us here. Guys, I hope you have a great spring, a safe spring, and a prosperous year. And we really do hope you're having a better day.
You're listening on the Verbal Crowd Network. Find more great shows at verbalcrowd.com.